Obviously, a lot of people are going to say these are Semitic conspiracy theories and tropes. Well, how is it that this is happening 100 years later? How is it that someone like a Candace Owens gets banned from Australia because of her Semitic rhetoric when Australia is like maybe 1 or 2%? How is it that we got students getting deported from the United States because of speech that criticizes Israel? They can burn an American flag, no problem, but then they burn an Israeli flag, they're getting deported. The reason why we can talk about this now is because of what happened on October 7th. October 7th happened, people saw all these kids dying, they got red pilled on what's going on, they figured out the history. Anyone with a heart realizes this is a genocide and Israel's in the wrong. The youth are siding with Palestine. Israel doesn't hold the narrative anymore because mainstream media doesn't have the same level of tentacle power that it used to have, and they're panicking.
You've called the Israel-Gaza conflict one of the most misunderstood events in modern history. If you had 2 minutes to explain without censorship, how would you describe what's actually going on?
There's a group of people that have an enormous amount of influence, power, and wealth, that have positions of authority in multiple first world countries, that are not necessarily loyal to their host nation, rather they are loyal to each other. They have been ostracized, removed, kicked out of, expelled out of hundreds of different societies over the course of time. And this has built up a resolve within themselves where they can only depend upon each other. And they will subvert their host nation and host people to support one another through nepotism, favorable practices, to assist each other to ensure their protection. That has culminated into what's now called the State of Israel. And whether you have someone who is in America or in Canada or in Australia or in New Zealand or in the UK, etc., their allegiance isn't to their home nation, rather it is to Israel a lot of the times. And what's up happening is these people lobby, they spend a ridiculous amount of money, they get positions of power to ensure that resources, support, weapons, whatever it may be, are always delivered to Israel at any cost, even if it means hurting the host nation, because the protection of people in the state overrides all. And for those that don't believe me, this is why they've been able to conduct a genocide in 4K in front of all of us with almost no accountability, because they have went ahead and taken over the most powerful country in the world that puts Israel interests first, to our dismay, because our politicians, our infrastructure is controlled by Zionists.
I think an important thing to touch on here is, why do you think you're allowed to say that now, but you weren't allowed to say that a few years ago?
The reason why we can talk about this now is because of what happened on October 7th. For those that are unaware, basically what happened was a bunch of Hamas resistance fighters broke into Israel. There was a lot of people that were killed. Somewhere around 1,200 people were killed, and 200 plus individuals were brought back into the Gaza Strip as hostages. That's the overall story. What's also important is that when this event occurred, the Israeli government and the mainstream media ran with a bunch of atrocity propaganda lies. 40 beheaded babies, babies in ovens, mass, all these horrible things. And it got so bad that Hamas knew that they were going to level Gaza, because they were manufacturing this atrocity to basically justify not just a conflict to destroy Gaza, but to also do an ethnic cleansing. And in mainstream media, no one ever talks about this, but Hamas did put a deal on the table on or about October 10th of 2023, days after the attack, to give all the hostages back in exchange for them not invading Gaza. Now, I know someone might be watching this and saying, well, Myra, they committed the worst terrorist attack in Israeli history. Why the hell should they have not, bombed the hell out of them? Well, it's because of what's going on right now. Because what ensued was, not only did the Israeli government deny that deal, they went in and systematically bombed out of Gaza, but they overplayed their hand. They ran in with the lies of babies in ovens and mass. And upon investigation, all of these things were thoroughly debunked. And not only were they thoroughly debunked, we have Twitter. Thanks to Elon Musk purchasing Twitter, people were able to go on their timeline and see babies getting blown up. They were able to see real beheaded babies that are Palestinian, that have nothing to do with this conflict, getting absolutely demolished. They're watching people burning in real time on fire in Rafah. And for the first time, Americans were able to see what's been going on in the Middle East for several decades. Because for the longest time, our government has told us that these terrorists hate us because of our freedoms. But what they don't tell us is they really hate us because we take away their freedoms. And this is what Osama bin Laden talked about in explicit detail in a letter to America back in like 2002, 2003. Now, and I want to make sure I get this timeline so your audience understands this and how we got what I call the Great Awakening now, or the Great Noticing, as some may call it. So October 7th happens. Israel owns with the lies, beheaded babies, mass, etc. Joe Biden spreads this. Western leaders spread this. Everyone gives the green light to Israel. Yes, Jordan Peterson famously, give him hell, Netanyahu, enough is enough, blah, blah, blah. They wage a crazy campaign and start blowing up Gaza, right? Now, videos coming out on TikTok, on Twitter, etc., showing all these innocent people suffering. And this led the young people who weren't indoctrinated by the war on terror, like I was, to ask questions. In the course of asking questions, a letter to America written by Osama bin Laden goes viral in November of 2023. In this letter, Osama bin Laden articulates all of his grievances with the West, whether it was the death of Iraqi children from, terrible sanctions, to killing Palestinians, to destroying the Middle East, destabilizing the Middle East. And the bottom line almost always was our support of Israel and how our government is controlled by Israel. Now, I didn't see this letter back when I was young because the mainstream media controlled everything. And they did not put that letter out for a reason saying, well, we don't know if it's going to activate sleeper cells in America. We're not going to put it out. Fast forward 20 plus years later, it comes out. And not only does it come out to an audience of people that weren't indoctrinated by the Bush eras of propaganda of wars. So they're able to look at it with a fresh set of eyes. And they're like, oh, no wonder they hate us. This guy's lining out like a whole thesis on why they're waging war on the United States. It went so viral that they had to take it down and ban it again because people started talking about it on TikTok. And TikTok, one of the good things about it, besides the stupid censorship for conservatives, is things go viral, they go viral. And it's very difficult for them to put out that fire. It went so viral that people got red-pilled on what was going on. Then next thing you know, they start researching this Palestine-Israel conflict. They look at the partition plan in 1947. They look at the Peel Commission in 1937. The Peel Commission in 1937, partition plan in 1947. Then they look at the 1967 war. Then they look at Yom Kippur. Then they look at the occupation. Then they look at the fact that they occupy the Golan Heights in the West Bank illegally. Then they look at how Gaza, they had to pull out in 2005. And as people do their history, they start to realize, wait, hold on one second. You've been oppressing these people for decades and you're mad that they're resisting? What the is going on here, right? You're living in an apartheid ethno-state where these people have no rights and they're being held down by a group of people. And then what's even worse is, oh, we pay for this. Before October 7th, most Americans didn't even know what the word Zionism was. Most Americans couldn't even point out where Gaza was on a map. But after October 7th happened and TikTok blew this topic up, etc., people got red-pilled on this very quickly. And the people that got red-pilled were the young people that weren't as indoctrinated or like the boomer audience and people from my generation, because we always grew up thinking Osama was the worst guy ever. They hate us for our freedoms, all this other stuff. But then we figured out that the war on terror was a lie. Obviously, it took me 10 plus 20 years to figure this out, but that's what happened. It got so bad that Jonathan Greenblatt of the ADL and multiple other groups, pro-Zionist groups, said, we need to deal with TikTok. We need to deal with this. Because at the time, it was about 70% pro-Palestine versus about 30% pro-Israel. And it was one of the few social media platforms that the Zionist lobby didn't have control of. So what do they say? We need to ban this thing. Now, to put things into context for you of how much influence they have, this is not the first time they talked about banning TikTok. Back in August of 2020, there was discussion about banning TikTok because it was Chinese spyware. The bill was brought to the floor. Trump said he was going to do it. They never did it. Fast forward to 2023, 2024, the Zionist lobby talks about it being a problem. Now they're actually going to do it. And I want this to really stick with your audience. When it came to national security for the United States of America against one of our biggest adversaries, China, they kicked the can down the road. When it came to the figuring out that people are waking up to their crimes, they got it banned. And that should tell you right then and there that Israel's national security overrides our own. Not only did they get it banned, they got it banned for 24 hours. It comes back. Trump fought to keep it up because TikTok was instrumental to his 2024 campaign. He gets it back. And a lot of Americans obviously rely on it for income and all this other shit. So it comes back for a day. But when it comes back, you can't say free Palestine. You can't put in watermelon emojis. You can't say from the river to the sea, all this stuff. That wasn't good enough. So then what happens? They buy it. Larry Ellison buys it. Who's Larry Ellison? A billionaire tech guy who is one of the biggest donors to the IDF. Oh yeah, and by the way, he's right? So they procure TikTok, and Trump basically had kept TikTok kind of like, alive in America, pending an American company buying it. But it's not that they bought it because of Chinese spyware. They bought it to control the narrative and reel in some of this anti-Israel stuff. And just to bring things full perspective, this was such a problem to them that Jonathan Greenblatt went to like Knesset, which is like the equivalent to like the Israeli, think of like the Senate and Congress kind of combined in one for them. He went over there and talked to the Israeli government saying, yo, we got a TikTok problem. We have an anti-Semitism problem, but it's not by platform, it's by age, it's by demographic. And he was figuring out that the youth do not support Israel. Why is this a problem? Because Israel only exists and is protected by the United States. If the young people do not believe in the Zionist mission and aren't indoctrinated to protect Israel, these people are eventually going to become politicians, legislators, people with influence. And if they don't support Israel, it's not going to be long until Israel won't exist anymore because they're surrounded by their enemies. So they understood that this is a big problem that they need to get ahead of. That is why Larry Ellison purchased it. That is why one of the main moderators for TikTok now is a former IDF Unit 8200 individual, which think of that as like their functional equivalent of NSA, right? They do a lot of signals intelligence, et cetera, Unit 8200 within IDF. And then you look at Facebook, Jordana Cutler. She's also used to work under Netanyahu, and she's the head of Israeli/Palestinian type content, and it's been overwhelmingly censored on Facebook now too. So when I say that they have control in every major infrastructural point, who runs Instagram? Adam Asari. Who runs Facebook/Meta? Mark Zuckerberg. Who runs the trust and safety for that? Jordana Cutler. Who runs TikTok now? Larry Ellison, right? Who ran YouTube for years? Susan Wojcicki, right? It's like, at this point, it's like, what the hell is going on? Who founded Google? Sergey Brin. Now, some people might say, oh, Myron, you're just conspiracy theorist, blah, blah, blah. It's like, is it really a coincidence or is it a coincidence? I think it's a coincidence because all these have power in these different infrastructure points that are vitally important. Big tech, government, lobbies, and we can see that they are using their influence to their benefit. And now, if you get on TikTok, you can't even talk about AIPAC. So what's happened is October 7th happened. People saw all these kids dying. They got red pill on what's going on. They figured out the history. Anyone with a heart realizes this is a fucking genocide and Israel's in the wrong and it's an illegal occupation. The youth are siding with Palestine. Israel doesn't hold the narrative anymore because mainstream media doesn't have the same level of tentacle power that it used to have, like in my generation, and they're panicking. This is why Benjamin Netanyahu now is starting to do more interviews. This is why they got a bunch of influencers that are out here getting paid $7,000 per post to post pro-Israel propaganda.
First, I want to say you did a really good job of summarizing 2,000 years of history to be the most relevant to what people should learn right now.
Yeah,
so
thank
you for that. And second, I'm not getting paid $7,000 to ask this question, but are you?
Well, I know that for a fact because you brought me on. The fact that you brought me on in itself, though, I know you're not one of these shills.
What, to your understanding, is Israel's argument? And is there any part of it that you kind of agree with?
So their argument is we have a right to defend ourselves. We've always been persecuted. We've always been expelled. This is the first time that we've had our own home and we have a right to exist. And to that, I want to be very clear. I don't hate people. They're people of the book. I'm Muslim. I love my Christians as well. So I don't have a problem with people. And actually, I don't think that, Israel should be destroyed. A lot of people might say, whoa, hold on, Myron. Wait, I thought you were like anti-Zionist. My thing is, Israel has a right to exist, but so do the Palestinians. So let's figure something out here. Whether it's a two-state solution or a one-state solution, we have to fix this problem. And the reason why this conflict happened, because no one ever talks about why October 7th happened. There's a multitude of different reasons, but I'll say one of the big reasons is because they've been occupying these people and they keep kicking the can down the road of the Palestinian question. Benjamin Netanyahu has done everything in his power to keep the Palestinians from having any type of right to determination and sovereignty. He's not going to do it because was behind Yitzhak Rabin being assassinated. I don't know if you want me to go down all that history and everything else like that. But Israel's never going to have peace until they recognize the Palestinians' right to self-determination and having either a two-state solution or a one-state solution where you bring them in. The reason why they don't want to do the one-state solution is because there's a lot of Palestinians, and then they would lose the majority presence. It needs to be a majority because they don't want the Palestinians to come in, vote their own people in. Obviously, their birth rates are higher. So that's what it is. So we got to figure something out because I think all people should be able to live in some level of security with dignity and peace. But you cannot sit there and say, your right to exist overrides someone else's right to exist and not expect those people to try to destroy your ability to exist now because you're trying to destroy theirs. And that's the problem. The Israelis exercise the very terrorism that they condemn Hamas for. The state of Israel was created through terrorism, right? The only difference between them and Hamas is they were smart enough to rebrand. The Haganah, Irgun, Lehi gangs, these were all Zionist paramilitary organizations that killed thousands of Palestinians and displaced over 1 million when you talk about the Nakba to create the state in 1948, which is that they rebranded so that they're not anymore. But I would argue if you're going to look at the definition of terrorism, which is basically enacting violence to push some type of political ideology, Israel is far more guilty of that than Hamas, Hezbollah, the IRGC, the Houthis. All of these institutions were created to combat Israel's terrorism, if we're going to be honest. But this is the stuff that no one wants to talk about because they don't want to have these difficult conversations about our greatest ally being the main perpetrator of all the problems in the Middle East. So if Israel wants peace, I think they have the right to peace, but that needs to come with bringing peace also alongside your brothers that you're sharing the land with that you stole from, the Palestinians. You need to give them some semblance of a state or a one state, a two state, whatever it is, Otherwise, you're never going to have peace. And the problem with the Israelis, they think that their right to exist overrides other people's right to exist. And for that, this is why they always have perpetual war.